here today to learn more about the logic model. The logic model is a tool that's going to assist in the development of strong regional workforce project applications. And today's workshop is led by Salomon Davila, who many of you may already know. He's a data and project management specialist contracted by LARC, who spent the past 2 decades collaborating with community colleges across the state to develop outcome-focused strategies and programs and to provide professional development workshops to those who will implement them. So thank you again for your attendance here at the Logic Model Workshop. And with that, Salomon, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. Just making sure everyone can hear me correctly or adequately. Everything working? Okay, cool, good. Thank you for having me. I've been a pleasure to work with LARC in many capacities in the past, and this is one of several workshops for which will help everyone prepare for the round 8 submission that is coming up soon enough. So that's what these workshops are for, and they're guiding everyone towards a proposal that many of you will be submitting, and the rubric that is also tied into some of this capacity building that these workshops are meant to address, and hoping this information is useful for everybody as you develop your proposals coming up. So today is the logic model workshop webinar that you will see in the moment. And then we have 2 more where the proposal will be next, and even detailed work plan development. And some of this is helpful even for submission of the proposal, but definitely in the implementation as well, to be as planned out as possible, as they say. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but I can add the link to this presentation in the chat. I think all that looks good. So you may see it, and if you have a different monitor or want to look ahead or stay behind. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll pause to read any questions. And if you have a question about the slide deck as we go through it, or the topic at large. Anyhow, so you can see a little bit of my credentials. I'm just glad to help our region, but I've worked extensively with community colleges, and now I work with multiple educational agencies at the state level, helping our high school students matriculate to every single post-secondary institution that the state of California manages. So it's been an interesting journey for myself. All right, so what is this particular logic model that we're going to get into all about? Well, I believe all of you may have been present for the LARC's present rollout for the round 8 submission, and as detailed here, there's some steps for which are being recommended. Everyone kind of participates and prepares for the new project, for the new rounds. So these workshops and these specific information is really for the first step, and that's project ideation. So these webinars are meant to assist everyone here to refine your ideas, to develop new ideas, to solicit new ideas, to plan them out as best as possible for your proposals, and to successfully submit them, and when selected, to successfully execute them as well. And so a lot of this work has to be done way ahead of time before anything else happens down the list, as you see here. All right, so there's a regional rubric, which some of you may have already seen. I put that link here as well, because this rubric will be important for the development of your proposal, as well as the logic model and in any other webinars that you saw there. So it's in tandem. This rubric is meant to be formative, meaning guiding you towards the level of quality that is expected for the proposals that are submitted, with a level of detail and planning that this ideation webinars are meant to help everybody with. All right, so let's get into, by the way, any questions with the framing of these webinars and why we're doing these, or hopefully why you're listening to this. Right. So today's objectives, logic modeling, and many of you probably have developed your own, hopefully in the past, or have seen part of some of these, this tool to help you plan. But the idea is that after understanding a logic model process, that you'll be able to backward map from outcomes into objectives and activities and the resources that are necessary for such, to plan out your proposals. There's also will be some links that many of you probably are familiar with to locate data sources that can frame the needs of your proposal, your problem statement of your proposal. We'll get to that. And then this other thing that's a bit, let's say, not as direct, but it's the assumptions and external factors that all of us operate under in your current educational institution or in the current region, right? There's elements for which you need to be aware of, and we'll discuss them, and I'll share with you some of the things I've gone through, and hopefully no one commits the same errors. But we all are under various assumptions and external factors that you should consider and should be part of your planning. Any questions with the objectives so far? All right. What is a logic model? Now, this, I'm sure that can be answered 100 different ways, but to be succinct and to be kind of direct to the point that will get us to a manageable working definition, it's essentially your theory of change. And changing of what, right? Well, it's a shift from what currently exists, the status quo, to some other new method or model that is sustained, right? Obviously, if whatever gets executed goes back to the status quo, then there wasn't change to begin with, right? It was just temporary change. The idea is that it's a sustained change. It's a new way of working versus what existed before. And that's the theory of change that you're proposing within a logic model as you get through thinking through the details. So it's the intention of where you're at. So knowing exactly the status quo as it exists today, that's what the data elements are for. That's some of your research that many of you have done locally in your institutions have demonstrated where are you currently at as it exists. But you also have the intention of where you want to go, right? There's new trends in labor market, there's new trends in occupations, there's new pedagogical changes, there's details of your institutions that are specific to your needs and to your programs and to your faculty and to your administration, right? All of you have that as well. So that's your intention. However, we need to plan for the actual implementation of such theory of change and literally the steps of how you're going to get there with the best of your abilities to be able to depict those steps and to be purposeful with, for example, if-then type of scenarios, or even just simply sequentially, and detail them out, not to the level of specificity to a certain date in the calendar necessarily. However, you do want to, at one point, schedule something that will represent an activity of sorts to get you from one point to the next. So, right, that's the right measure of specificity that we'll find at some point throughout these webinars, especially when we get down to the work plan. But that's implementation, right, of your theory of change. And lastly, and I think what most of us typically get into this business of education about is the impact that we want to perform on the status quo. But most importantly is, how will you know that you've arrived to such impact? What tells you that you've gotten there? What changes will you be able to see, ideally measurable? And setting up these goals to define that success is really the impact that we're all trying to measure. And you'll see how the logic model is a way to kind of capture this theory of change through these steps that are depicted here. All right, so another way you could answer what is a logic model is just simply a diagrammatic map right, of ideas, right? And so it shows processes for which you're managing this change that you're trying to invoke. And so you begin with questions about how you're going to address the different stakeholders, how are people going to be involved, what things are they going to be doing, what goes first, what goes next, what sort of objectives are you trying to meet, right? All that can be kind of put together in a logic model, like some examples that you see down here, and we'll get into the boxes and stuff like that. But it's simply just a way to graphically depict these ideas to someone, to maybe solicit feedback or to communicate, right, to different folks as you brainstorm ideas. Now, at the beginning, I know they look like boxes and they seem kind of in this format that I'm showing them in this slide, digital, but they don't have to begin this way. They can begin by post-it notes or just literally a doodle or something you do on a scratch piece of paper, by just drawing connections to words, drawing connections to activities, drawing connections to departments in your institution. But the idea is that you need to understand there's connections to some related elements, right, that you're considering. And so either scribbling or post-it notes at the very beginning are very useful for kind of picturing what inevitably will be depicted in a end product of a logic model. So it is a bit messy at the beginning on design because you're brainstorming. And a lot of you, I think, will understand the whole aspect of that process. Many of your students, I'm sure, enjoy that in the classroom. So this is my invitation to you to do that for this sort of process as well. And lastly, another way you can answer what is a logic model. It's simply a way to assist planning, implementing, and evaluating of changes that have occurred. So the planning and implementing, right, we sort of already addressed that a little bit with the theory of change, but that last one there, evaluation, is also part of a logic model, because that's how you will, in a way, measure the success or the impact of your theory of change. And so evaluation may be part of what you also need to include within the logic model. And so this is my best attempt. The next slide is a bit better than this one, but here I put a little bit more effort to describe the different buckets of processing. Starting from the top, you need to consider all your resources and inputs that you may need. Now, you may not start listing all the resources and inputs. You may actually start at the other end of what impact you want to perform, and then work backwards to the resources that you need. But in a logic model, you kind of work both ways as you're developing this, depending on how much activity of a post-it notes or activities of scribbling you've done previous to this logic model. The point is that there's no right way of building it, but there is a flow to the process of the execution, I should say, of the logic model. And that's why I'm starting with resources. One thing most definitely to consider, if you do start from the beginning of resources and that front, is what problem statement are you trying to address? And so many of us do start with the impact that we want to perform, which is sort of like in a positive way to look at things. But sometimes it helps to know the problem, because that may give light to the resources to the problem itself. Like that gets down to more of a deficit, if that makes any sense. Why you're proposing what you're proposing, obviously, because partly it is to gain some of those resources. So phrasing it as a problem statement can help you, I think, address some of that. Moving on to your resources and inputs, you have various activities. And now activities, I think, is a word that we've been moving away from in education, because previously we would just work under activities. Like, for example, I remember when I was helping a CTE program, a CTE office, they would tell me, yes, we went to 15 advisory meetings, right? And that should be a successful implementation of CTE programming. But the activity of an advisory meeting in itself may not be the success that you want. You actually want something from that may be new programs or updated courses or whatever the case may be. And that in itself is the outcome that we want to reach, not the activity in itself. So this is not an end in itself, but it's simply an action that is scheduled using your resources and inputs that will just get you to the next step, and that's the objectives and outputs. Think of these as almost deliverables in a way, like the new courses of a CTE program resulting from the advisory committee. The advisory committee was a necessary activity, but that's not in itself the end. It's the new courses of the new program, right? That's the objective. So these objectives and outputs could be short-term, could be, kind of middle, or can be even longer term as well. So this is all sort of sequential, where the sequentialing comes into play. And again, they're the product of activities, or think of them as a deliverable in some cases. The thing about this is that you should be able to measure the outputs and objectives, like quantifying any element of said activities or the outputs of activities. So this is where the metrics kind of fall in this particular category of outputs and objectives. Now, ideally, you start identifying multiplier effects or synergistic activities where one may result in multiple things, right? So that you're not doing everything sequentially one-to-one. In series, you're kind of working things in parallel or maybe in multiplier effects where one activity can like launch several other objectives, and you can reach many other things with like one milestone that you may want to reach, for example. So you want to look for such activities as well in here and to plan for those if you can. And depending on who you talk in the different logic models, they maybe end here and then quickly go to impact. Sometimes we include outcomes after objectives, where objectives may have like a more realistic metric and deliverable. Outcomes are a little bit further out, where it's more of a system level facilitating your change that you set out to perform. So it may not be permanent. This is what I was referring to earlier, that this change may slide back to status quo. And maybe that's okay if the outcome isn't permanent. If what the system is not permanent, but the outcome should be permanent. For example, I'll talk a little bit about a project I implemented where it was,
it's me.
We used the objective of faculty community groups, and those were the short-term objectives for the broader outcome of implementing a new program, right? And those programs are permanent, but the faculty group that first developed those are no longer there, right? So this is some of the things that you need to consider in terms of the outcomes, and they're more longer term. Lastly, the impact, that's just the new stage, and it's more, this is something that more of a goal and a bit more amorphous with the description, but it's just some of the things that is just the new state of how things are, and that's what they are. Underpinning all of this across the full logic model as you go through the process, and again, as I mentioned, you can start from one end or begin from the other, or begin from the middle and go out. There's baseline information that everyone needs to have for their logic model, and specifically the assumptions that you're undertaking to making the decisions of your logic model, as well as external factors that you need to consider, like from simple things like deadlines or capacity within your institution, anything like that. Those are what I mean by assumptions and external factors. You want to keep those near because they underpin everything that you're putting up above in your logic model. Any questions with this particular set of with this slide or this general introduction to logic modeling? No questions? I must be doing a good job or a really lousy job. Hopefully it's the latter. So lastly, and then this is what, just to kind of put a little pin on the assumptions and external factors, you want to use them to plan your success, obviously. And you need to anticipate there's going to be some risk to things. And so this is why this is important. When you communicate your intent of implementing your particular theory of change, you really are doing that to enlist others to assist you or to provide input or feedback. In this enlisting of others and of the concepts of your ideas, of your understanding of the problem, all of those things, you're enlisting others. And so an activity like I mentioned, post-it notes, using that as a way to bring action into the enlistment of others is a good way to do that, where you can sort them, you can move them around, you can make decisions, you can pick one up and put it somewhere else, you can throw one away, right? That's part of the process of that. So you definitely want to include activities with others like that, where they can sort of react even physically, like literally posting notes to enlist them, right? You also want to make sure to determine the assumptions and the external factors, which ones inform activities, which of them inform your output. This is what I meant, that they underpin almost everything, including your inputs and as well. But assumptions and external factors need to be considered for everything. That's the point. And you want to state them. Don't assume everyone knows them. State them, because you're trying to mitigate the risks that are involved with your theory of change. I'll give you a real concrete example, and I'll go in further later on. But when we assumed that we need a new program for a CTE, for a CTE program, new courses, for example, we assumed that the faculty would be on board with updating the program, right? That's an assumption. Is it fair to assume that? I don't know. You can decide that for your particular case, but you need to state that the faculty on board with changing a program, and that's an assumption. And mitigating the risk of them not understanding or everyone not being on the same page is something that you need to plan for. Lastly, you need to be critical about synthesizing your ideas, especially when it comes down to after brainstorming, after working through the post-its, after soliciting input and feedback and such. Then you need to be critical about synthesizing these to actionable logic model categories with the outcomes, with the metrics, with the activities, with the resources, right? And this is where your proposal is really emerging from that process, by you being critical and with assertions saying, this is what I need to do that and to perform this for these outcomes. And ultimately, that process of being critical and synthesizing ideas, in my opinion, is where you become a bit more, what's the word? You have more convictions about your theory of change, right? Where before your theory of change was a concept, now you have convictions of, this is the theory of change that I want to put forward. And all that happens with a logic model. Here's a little template that you may have, but you can just search logic model, and there's many different versions of this. This is just the one that I'm presenting here, but you're more welcome to use the simple one that you can copy and paste to Excel, I think. If not, I think the rubric has the link with the rubric has also a slide, a sheet that has the same logic model template. Okay. Sort of wrapping up a little bit of different topics here. Why do we even want to use a logic model? Well, not only will it help your proposal, as I just finished describing, that's your theory of change that you're enlisting others, but it allows you to define your problem. It also allows you to define the impact that you're searching. And I believe critically is to enlist others. And I even put beyond LARC, which I know this is why we're all here, but you may use this for other grants or just other purposes when you get down to proposing new programs at your local level, like your local curricular instruction committee, for example. you may need some of this information as well. So that's first and foremost why you need a logic model. I would argue that you can expand your logic model to help you with your work plan, which is a measure of your progress and whether you're meeting such outcomes and the metrics and the activities, and making sure that you activate the resources that you set out to activate. If you need to hire individuals or solicit input from others, or plan meetings, right? You have a way, a template of starting that planning and literally kind of checking them off in a way to perform these activities. So it's a way of measuring progress. But lastly, it's a way to evaluate yourself after things are completed or as they're being completed by documenting meetings, documenting updates, what are the results of certain objectives, what are the results of the outcomes using metrics. You analyze some of these metrics, you can report on them, and you can even publicize your findings as well. So all of that is really can be drawn upon your initial work of a logic model as well. And by the way, I've gone through this full process, and I can attest that work that you perform 3-4 years in the past is still informing you to the current day, because you put in that work ahead of time. All right, a little bit of different page. I'm moving away from the logic model, but because there's some other assumptions in this presentation, I think that I just wanted to address, and that's the concept of a project, right? You're proposing a round 8 project, but the question is, what is a project? And I put this in here because it may help you inform the logic model, or at least the development of the logic model. And in using the official definition of sorts of the Project Management Institute, project is actually something temporary. It's a temporary implementation of scheduled activities that result from planning with such resources. Now, the deliverables typically are measured, and hence how you reach set objectives. But the key word there is that it's temporary, right? Because you're implementing a theory of change, you're changing the status quo, systems level change, and then after your project is done, there's a new reality, right? While the project pretty much closes after some time. Now, through this project, you're really managing change, right? Because you're implementing your theory of change. So you're managing that change as you're implementing. And you need to identify intermediate metrics within this to let you know whether or not you're on the right track of implementing these such changes. And you have to measure them to take corrective action and get to the right track of achieving your set outcomes. And so ultimately in a project, you're at the end of the day managing change. And that means a lot of things. It could mean, for example, have I met with my stakeholders? Have I presented my information? Have I completed XY meeting? Has the proposals for courses been submitted, right? But not just the factual metrics, but it could also be the intangibles. Are people attending my meetings? Have they responded to my emails? Is no one returning my phone calls, right? That's also part of the change management, because that should inform you whether or not people are engaged, for example, through this change. And so that change management is a pretty big subject in itself. And I think all of us kind of go through that in our own individual ways, but needs to be especially paid attention to here, because as you develop your logic model and develop your outcomes, you need to consider some of those details within the project planning as well. Is someone helping you coordinate it? Is someone helping you communicate and helping others through change? Are meetings planned? Are they pre-programmed? Details like that. Lastly, I think importantly, I think for our group here, I know this quite well from working with Carl Perkins and other grants in the past, a project is not supplanting what are activities that should be necessary to support existing programs. This is not only my opinion, but I believe it's mostly written in most of the grants nowadays that we a lot of us undertake. Is the word is it's not supplanting what should be sort of funded by the college. So, and again, that wouldn't be a change. It would be obviously just necessities to support programs, which there's other avenues for such resources, like your program review, your budgeting at your local institutions. I'm sure have some ways for you to engage to solicit such resources. All right, any questions about a project? What's a project? We're all pros at projects, I think. And lastly, I think this is also another slide I wanted to include to unpack this a bit. I alluded to it earlier, the outcome. It may start as a problem statement, as I mentioned, right, where it shapes your planning. And the reason why the problem statement or to reverse the impact or to reverse the outcome as a problem statement is because the question that I want everyone to consider when developing a logic model is, are you solving the right problem? Right? And that's, I think, sometimes an omission. We would agree that, for example, we need new programs for new occupations. That's obviously sort of the impact for many of you. However, what is the right problem that you're solving? Are you solving the development of the curriculum? Are you solving the community of practice that needs to be created? Are you solving the credentials that need to be aligned with for industry? Like, what is the right problem? Because just creating a new program in itself isn't the end at all of solving the problem, but it's other details that you may want to pay attention to. And so I put an example here. There was a problem that was presented to me several years ago that, we need new graduates in cloud technology. But that wasn't the problem. That is sort of the impact. But the real problem is that we needed a package, a core curriculum of sorts. And how do we create that? And what are the steps to kind of create a core curriculum so that we can enlist faculty and get their input so that we can all march together as a region with cloud technology programs, right? Then we'll get the new graduates. And so the real problem was that core curriculum. All right, an outcome, as I mentioned, is something observable, measurable, change after the project is practically completed. Like, it's at the end that you would see an outcome. It's not always at the beginning. That's why it's so difficult. It's maybe a year or 2 years out after you complete your project. Ideally, it's sustained, like it doesn't go back from status quo, and it has predictable results once again after the change is implemented, after your project is completed. So that's what makes an outcome quite difficult to achieve and hard to conceptualize in a way, because is essentially the new reality after your change. However, it should be assessed and evaluated to at some point maybe change, because at that point that'll be the status quo, and at some point that may be necessitating to change as well. So that's in effect what happens to most of our programs is after some time we need to update them. So that's what an outcome typically relates to, is a little bit further out, while an objective would be a bit closer to reality, more real time, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe a year away. So just to help frame some of that language here. And then lastly, we have a couple of data sources that I think many of you are probably used to looking into, but I just wanted to not assume that. There's CalPAS Plus, there's our Chancellor's Office Data Mart. LERC has some Center of Excellence reports that are out there that many of you can use. There's regional resources that LARC produces. But don't forget, I think probably more powerful are your local institutional research offices or potentially your own surveys that you may perform. In my tenure as faculty and administrator, I performed many surveys at career fairs, at events, in my local high school, feeder high schools. And, some of these surveys were up to a couple of thousand students that really helped me to hone in on what's exactly is necessary to the student experience. So I highly recommend, if you have the time and capacity and bandwidth, to use surveys as an informative tool, which of course will help you frame your needs, which help you frame your problem statement, which will help you in your logic model. All right, I think I'm rounding here to just some anecdotal information here that I'm wrapping up here. And that's, I wanted to put this because this is my own experience. I worked within the California Career Pathways grants a while back with LA High Tech. It was a regional project with about 8 colleges of LA County colleges. And we tried to do a lot. And we even had a logic model for that particular grant. And it was quite sophisticated and quite impressive, I should say. But some of the details that I just talked about recently were not included in the logic model, like assumptions and maybe risk and solving the right problem. Now, the right problem we missed because we didn't reach the outcomes that we wanted, and that was updated information technology programs. However, I used the knowledge of that project to inform the cloud workforce project, and where, as I mentioned before, the right problem was having a core curriculum, for example, or having a community of practice with faculty, or identifying credentials to map to and have our students achieve those said credentials of industry. And those were the problems that we needed to solve, which required special attention and mapping and planning and resources and execution of various objectives to reach those particular problems, outcomes, I should say, instead of just generally stating that we need new programs, right, and new students, and just painting a too big of a picture or too amorphous of a picture to enlist people when they couldn't understand where to engage the project. Folks just didn't know where to jump in to input. They didn't know how to jump in to put in their opinions about, yes, that core course looks good, or yes, that assessment looks great, or this certification is this, or whatever. There was just no planning of the project to have folks to enlist them, right, including the participants of the project, much less even the folks that are approving some of the proposals, which I think is a bigger audience, but really folks that would help you in this particular project. So I believe the learning that I did is identifying the right problems to solve was critical for us. And the Cloud Workforce Project now has, I believe, over 2,000 enrollments a year over across 12 colleges in LA. And then if you consider California, I think we're over 30 colleges that is using the core curriculum. So what I want to say is that it says something about iteration in this concept of the logic model, that you need to continually review and update your understanding and just grow in your collaboration regionally by addressing these different elements through iteration. Yeah, doing it as over and over again as much as time as you need to. So I'll just end with that. Iterate as much as you need to for your inspiration, for your ideation, which is a lot of what is at the beginning. And ultimately the implementation is a factor of like measuring the metrics and doing corrective actions if necessary, right? But you need to iterate. And prototype logic models. You may have various inputs from various stakeholders that you may want to have one logic model to present to maybe decision makers, maybe another one for a specific group of stakeholders. So you may have nested logic models, if that makes sense. So you may have various logic models. And then you want to update and reference it frequently. It's not something that you do it just for the proposal and forget about it. You want to go back to it and make sure you're on track of executing your outcomes. So I'll end with that and open it up to any questions if anyone has any.
Hi, Salomon. Thank you for this. I want to say it's very high level, and it's great. I hope we can get the PowerPoint. I think it'll be useful. But until we actually get down and do this, I think it's gonna be difficult to tell how well we've really learned it. Is there any chance you have any case studies that we could practice with?
Solomon, you are muted. If you want to unmute yourself to answer the question, thank you.
Solomon, are you able to hear the questions? I'll type him a note in the chat.
Uh-oh. Did I lose audio?
No, I'm here.
One second. Maybe it's on my end here.
I don't think so.
I don't hear any sound.
Can you
No.
hear? Nothing?
Nothing from me?
No.
One
Yeah.
second, everybody. Let me make sure my speakers are set up correctly. One second.
It could be mine.
I got it. I got it. Bruce, was that you?
Yeah, it was.
Yes, sir. I got my speaker working here.
Oh, cool. I would just like to share that there's some milestones to this. Some that from a regional project, there's some, if you're going to develop one, there's some, I don't know, not tricks, but there's some real challenges to it, as Solomon alluded to, especially on ones that are somewhat oblique, that don't have really defined outcomes on the front side, like the regional projects or the cornerstone projects, as they're called. Sector projects are a little bit easier to define, not necessarily easier to execute. But I do go with that the cornerstone to the success of the project and the project lead, whoever happens to be, is a sustainability piece, and it has to have continuing outcomes or continuing growth, progress within the program. If it's a one-shot deal, normally these programs right now, we're only going to get 18 months out of them. By the time all the paperwork's done. And at that point, it's really, unless you have some succession plan, not sustaining plan, but a succession plan put together so that you can really have some impact, it's maybe not a great idea to jump into it. Identify your partners first. Find out well, first of all, identify the need. That way you can talk intelligently to your partners. If it's a sector program or whatever program it is. And so just make sure you've identified the need, document the need. That's where the data piece comes back in. And then you can make a business argument as to why we should invest resources or realign resources to try and address this need. After that, you identify your partners. And I think the most important piece is identify who the champion within that organization is, because somebody's got to own it. If nobody owns it, nothing happens. The rest of it is, of course, you want to make sure that it is self-sustaining. If not, it was a idea that somebody had cast in the wind, right? And if self-sustaining comes to institutionalization of it. It has to be owned by the organization. Then from there it becomes evolutionary, and you have a chance to validate the steps. You don't want to make the steps validation on a monthly basis, but certainly should have them on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. You should know where you're at. The key to it, if you're going to take a lead, is are people spending their money? Because you're, like Solomon said, you're not going to get outcomes from a project for semesters away. So you don't know how well you're doing. Hopefully the enrollment's gone up a little bit or you've changed it a little bit. And in the sector projects, make sure you have an employer base who's engaged, or everybody brings a partner, so we can listen to the voice of the customer. I guess that's it. I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole, but there's some real lessons here that are concrete and I think pretty universal.
Thank you, Bruce. Always words of wisdom. Can folks hear me? I don't even know.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'm not sure how my audio is. I was asked to see if there's a real concrete example, and I just put one. I have many of these, by the way. So I shared the link on the chat if you want to reach and grab it. Now, this is sort of the final product of a logic model. However, the work that goes behind all this is a lot of the planning, as Bruce mentioned. That's the detail work, which you can do everything that, like making sure you have the champion, making sure you have the partners. I mean, how you do that, I think, is also important. You can obviously send an email to folks, say, hey, who wants to be a partner? And of course, people can say, yes, me. Or you can present an idea and let them know what you're looking to implement and have them put a little sort of engaged interest in partnering with what's being requested or required of them, right? Including a champion if they have the capacity to implement set changes. And so, so you don't see that in these logic models. Obviously, you need to do some of that groundwork, which is somehow implied down here with your assumptions and external factors. You're assuming people are going to partner with you and you have a champion, right? Well, make sure that you list that as an assumption and make sure that you mitigate that risk if you need to, so that it is a sustainable theory of change. So this is an example for implementing the cloud program, but in the Bay Area specifically, because I started with them helping implement the cloud up there. So these are sort of just general listings of outcomes, the outputs of activities and the products, the deliverable, who participated, and potential resources necessary for that participation. And you can see that every one that you would think would be in here is represented. And this is a simple one where it's almost linear. So that's why you don't see a lot of flow maps. But it was meant to, again, enlist administrators and faculty to implement a sort of a career pathway in cloud careers. Yes, you can. I believe the links, Mike, if you should be able to access the links for the slide deck. If you don't have it, I will include it again, so that you're welcome to use them. And there's several other resources I'm sure you can find online regarding logic models. Was there any other question I missed, Judy? I think, oh, you're just letting me know that we're speaking. Any other questions?
All right, if there are no more questions, then we will adjourn this logic model workshop. And thank you again for your participation. If you have any questions about what you've learned today, once you've had a chance to digest everything and let it sink in and maybe have taken some more time to review the information and maybe review the recording, feel free to reach back out to Lark, to Solomon with any questions that you may have, so that as you guys begin to work on your project applications, we can make sure that they're strong and that we're able to utilize the tools that are available to us just to help make our jobs easier and the direction that we're taking more clear. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday weekend.